Ladies and gentlemen, there is a silent assassin among us. It wears a warm smile, whispers sweet nothings into our ears, and convinces us that everything is fine as it slowly drains the life from our souls. That assassin is comfort. Not comfort in its rightful form, rest after labor, peace after war, but a distorted kind, a counterfeit paradise where challenge is avoided, conflict is suppressed, and the inner voice is silenced. Let us look deeper not with the eyes of society, but with the eye of the soul. When a person settles too deeply into comfort, they begin to drift, slowly, imperceptibly, away from their own soul. Comfort becomes not a resting place, but a hiding place. And in that hiding, something within them begins to rot. They do not see it at first. Life still functions, the routine continues, the external image remains intact, but underneath, something essential begins to die. Not a physical death, but a psychic one, the death of confrontation, the death of struggle, the death of truth. In the absence of tension, the inner landscape is left unchallenged, and the darker parts of the self, what has been disowned, repressed, and feared, begin to grow stronger. These parts do not disappear simply because they are ignored. Quite the opposite. They feed on denial. The more we seek refuge in the easy, the familiar, the smooth, and the soft, the more we empower the shadow. It is like a beast left in the basement, unfed and unseen. It does not weaken. It waits. It waits for a crack in the persona. It waits for a moment of crisis. And when the mask slips, even just a little, it emerges, not as a quiet whisper, but as chaos. People deceive themselves by thinking that if they avoid discomfort, they are safe. But safety bought by avoidance is a lie. That which is not integrated will one day erupt. The anger repressed becomes bitterness. The fear denied becomes paralysis. The desires unspoken become resentment. These elements are all parts of the self that were not given a voice because comfort told us not to disturb the peace. But peace built on suppression is not peace. It is spiritual decay dressed in politeness. There is a price to pay for living too comfortably. You stop being real. You stop being whole. You become a curated image, a collection of socially acceptable fragments. You live to maintain appearances while the inner world falls into disorder. The inner war never ends. It only becomes silent. But silence in the soul is not peace. It is the noise of neglected truths waiting for a reckoning. The human being was not made to remain shallow. We are called into depth, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. Depth requires descent, into fear, into contradiction, into darkness, and it is precisely this descent that comfort forbids. Comfort seduces us into surface living. It keeps us floating above our wounds, above our anger, above our purpose. But what floats eventually drifts away. The shadow grows in comfort because it is left unchallenged. And whatever is unchallenged grows unchecked. It festers in the dark and poisons from within. The only antidote is confrontation. A man or woman who dares to confront their own darkness, to explore what lies beneath the mask, is not broken. They are becoming whole. But the journey into the shadow is not made from the couch. It is made in the fire. The soul does not grow where it is comfortable. It grows where it is forced to choose, to act, to awaken. And so long as one hides in the lull of ease, they are not living. They are merely existing, while the truest parts of themselves remain in exile. There is a quiet misconception that suffering is a punishment, a defect in the order of life, something to be avoided at all costs. But suffering is not the enemy. It is not the curse it appears to be on the surface. It is, in fact, a compass, one forged in the deepest layers of the soul, pointing not away from life, but directly into it. To suffer consciously is to stand at the doorway of transformation. It is an invitation to descend into meaning, into confrontation, into the raw and unfiltered truth of who we are. People are taught to run from pain. From an early age, we are told that suffering is wrong, that it is a detour from happiness, a sign that something is broken in us. So we bury it. We disguise it with distractions. We sedate it with habits, routines, substances, technology, small talk, anything to drown out the ache. But what we call healing is often just avoidance. What we call peace is often just a negotiated truce, with a pain we refuse to face. Yet the soul is not fooled. It aches because it wants to be heard. It suffers because it wants to be seen. Every wound is a message, every ache a language. Pain is the body's way of speaking the mind's deepest silence. It tells us that something is misaligned, that a truth is being ignored, that an old pattern is no longer sustainable. And until we have the courage to turn toward it rather than away, we remain fragmented, outwardly functional, inwardly lost. The most dangerous suffering is not the kind that screams. It is the quiet despair of a life unlived, the slow erosion of purpose, the hollowness that comes from avoiding the call of depth. And the strange thing is this: the more we resist suffering, the more it controls us. What we avoid becomes what we serve. But when we stop resisting, when we sit with our pain, listen to it, explore its roots, we begin to find something sacred buried inside. Pain is a teacher that does not flatter. It strips us of illusions, of masks, of shallow comforts. It demands honesty, brutal honesty, but in that honesty is freedom. There is a kind of knowing that only emerges from the fire, a kind of clarity that only comes when all else has been burned away. When a person truly suffers and does not flee, they meet themselves, not the version shaped by society, but the one shaped by truth, by darkness, by inner necessity. It is in suffering that we discover what truly matters. We stop chasing the artificial and begin seeking the eternal. We abandon roles and start asking real questions. Who am I beneath this pain? What is life asking of me? What must I let die so something new can be born? These are not surface questions, they are soul questions, and only suffering has the authority to lead us to them. To suffer well is not to become consumed by pain. It is to walk through it with awareness. It is to let it sharpen us, refine us, bring us into greater alignment with who we are meant to become. There is no growth without friction, no awakening without disturbance. The seed breaks before it sprouts. The skin tears before it heals. The psyche must confront itself before it can integrate. Those who learn to suffer consciously begin to see pain not as an interruption of life, but as a deep expression of it. They become capable of compassion, not out of pity, but out of knowing. They hold space for others, not with answers, but with presence. They are no longer afraid of the dark because they have seen what lives there, and it was not death. It was the buried self waiting to rise, and so suffering when met with courage does not shrink us, it expands us, it does not destroy, it initiates, it does not curse, it calls, and those who answer that call are never the same. They become rooted, real, whole, not because they escaped pain, but because they let it become the doorway to their own becoming. There is a quiet misconception that suffering is a punishment, a defect in the order of life, something to be avoided at all costs. But suffering is not the enemy. It is not the curse it appears to be on the surface. It is, in fact, a compass, one forged in the deepest layers of the soul, pointing not away from life, but directly into it. To suffer consciously is to stand at the doorway of transformation. It is an invitation to descend into meaning, into confrontation, into the raw and unfiltered truth of who we are. People are taught to run from pain. From an early age, we are told that suffering is wrong, that it is a detour from happiness, a sign that something is broken in us. So we bury it. We disguise it with distractions. We sedate it with habits, routines, substances, technology, small talk, anything to drown out the ache. But what we call healing is often just avoidance. What we call peace is often just a negotiated truce with a pain we refuse to face. Yet the soul is not fooled. It aches because it wants to be heard. It suffers because it wants to be seen. Every wound is a message, every ache a language. Pain is the body's way of speaking the mind's deepest silence. It tells us that something is misaligned, that a truth is being ignored, that an old pattern is no longer sustainable. And until we have the courage to turn toward it rather than away, we remain fragmented, outwardly functional, inwardly lost. The most dangerous suffering is not the kind that screams. It is the quiet despair of a life unlived. The slow erosion of purpose, the hollowness that comes from avoiding the call of depth. And the strange thing is this: the more we resist suffering, the more it controls us. What we avoid becomes what we serve. But when we stop resisting, when we sit with our pain, listen to it, explore its roots, we begin to find something sacred buried inside. Pain is a teacher that does not flatter. It strips us of illusions, of masks, of shallow comforts. It demands honesty, brutal honesty, but in that honesty is freedom. There is a kind of knowing that only emerges from the fire, a kind of clarity that only comes when all else has been burned away. When a person truly suffers and does not flee, they meet themselves, not the version shaped by society, but the one shaped by truth, by darkness, by inner necessity. It is in suffering that we discover what truly matters. We stop chasing the artificial and begin seeking the eternal. We abandon roles and start asking real questions. Who am I beneath this pain? What is life asking of me? What must I let die so something new can be born? These are not surface questions. They are soul questions, and only suffering has the authority to lead us to them. To suffer well is not to become consumed by pain. It is to walk through it with awareness. It is to let it sharpen us, refine us, bring us into greater alignment with who we are meant to become. There is no growth without friction, no awakening without disturbance. The seed breaks before it sprouts. The skin tears before it heals. The psyche must confront itself before it can integrate. Those who learn to suffer consciously begin to see pain not as an interruption of life, but as a deep expression of it. They become capable of compassion, not out of pity, but out of knowing. They hold space for others, not with answers, but with presence. They are no longer afraid of the dark because they have seen what lives there, and it was not death. It was the buried self waiting to rise, and so suffering, when met with courage, does not shrink us. It expands us. It does not destroy, it initiates. It does not curse, it calls, and those who answer that call are never the same. They become rooted, real, whole, not because they escaped pain, but because they let it become the doorway to their own becoming. There is a tendency in the modern world to speak of suffering as though it were an error, an aberration to be corrected, a flaw in the otherwise clean machinery of life. But suffering is not a mistake. It is not a malfunction of existence. It is an ancient, necessary, and deeply personal invitation to transformation. It arrives unbidden and unwanted, yet it carries within it a key. The question is not why we suffer, but what suffering is asking of us. It is not merely pain. It is meaning in disguise. Most people try to outrun their pain. They cover it with the noise of busyness, the pursuit of success, the endless scrolling of images and opinions. But suffering is not fooled by these distractions. It lingers. It seeps into the quiet moments. It haunts the silence between conversations, and in that haunting it calls. Suffering is the soul's alarm bell, crying out that something must be faced, something must be unearthed, something within has been silenced too long. It is not here to punish. It is here to awaken. When we suffer, we stand at a crossroads. One path leads toward resentment, withdrawal, and denial. The other, less traveled, leads inward. That path demands courage. It requires that we look honestly at what we've avoided, the grief we never expressed, the truths we denied, the dreams we abandoned. It asks us to sit with our fears, not to fix them, but to understand them, and in that understanding, something sacred begins to stir. Suffering is the passage through which the unconscious becomes conscious. Pain strips away illusions. It shows us that we are not who we pretended to be, nor are others who we thought they were. It tears the mask from the ego, and for a moment, sometimes longer, we are left exposed, raw, vulnerable. But in that rawness, a strange clarity emerges. The trivial falls away, the essential remains. We begin to see what truly matters, not as a concept, but as a lived truth. The soul has no interest in comfort for its own sake. It is after meaning, and meaning often hides beneath suffering. To avoid suffering is to avoid depth. It is to remain shallow, fragmented, superficial. Growth does not happen in safety. It happens in the breaking. The human spirit, like gold, is refined by fire, and it is suffering that provides that fire, not to destroy us, but to transmute us. What was rigid becomes fluid. What was false falls away, and what is true, though it may have been buried for years, begins to emerge with quiet authority. Many carry wounds from child, childhood betrayals, unmet needs, the absence of love where it was needed most. These wounds shape their world, view, their relationships, their choices. But until those wounds are faced, until the pain is brought into the light, the past continues to dictate the present. Suffering revisits us not because it wants to torment us, but because it wants to free us. It knocks on the same door again and again, not out of cruelty, but because that door leads to liberation. Suffering is the soul's rebellion against stagnation. It is the refusal of the psyche to remain confined in a life that no longer fits. When a person is suffering, something within them is trying to be born, but birth is not without pain, it never has been. The old self resists, the habits resist, the image we crafted and clung to resists. But resistance does not stop the process. It only makes it harder. Those who surrender to the pain, not passively but consciously, find that on the other side of suffering is not death, but renewal. There are depths in every human being that can only be reached through sorrow. There are insights that can only be gained through grief. There is a kind of love, a kind of compassion, that only grows in the soil of shared suffering. We connect with others not through perfection, but through pain. We find each other in the dark, and it is there that the most honest forms of relationship are born. The question, then, is not whether we will suffer, because we will. The question is whether we will allow our suffering to guide us inward. Whether we will trust that the pain we carry is not senseless, but sacred. That it speaks in symbols and metaphors, and that beneath its sharpness lies the possibility of healing and wholeness. To walk with suffering is to enter the temple of the self. It is to acknowledge that growth is not linear, nor is it always visible. Sometimes the most profound transformation happens beneath the surface, in the hidden chambers of the heart, where the soul quietly reshapes itself through tears, silence, and the slow rebuilding of meaning. And so, suffering is not a curse, it is a compass. It does not come to end us, it comes to initiate us. And if we dare to follow where it leads, we may discover not only who we are, but who we were always meant to become. There comes a time in every life when the known world begins to fall apart. The ground that once felt solid starts to tremble. Beliefs that once gave comfort feel empty. The patterns we relied on, routines, identities, roles, begin to crack, revealing a strange and unfamiliar landscape beneath. This is the moment when chaos calls. Not the chaos of destruction for its own sake, but the deeper kind, the chaos that breaks open the hollow structures of the false self so that something real can finally emerge. Most people ignore this call. They tighten their grip on order, cling to the familiar and mistake decay for stability. But the soul does not care for appearances. It cares for wholeness, and sometimes the only way to wholeness is through the unraveling. Chaos is not an enemy. It is a force of nature within the psyche, and it speaks the language of transformation. It comes disguised as disruption, as crisis, as confusion. It comes when what you've built no longer serves what you're becoming. And though it feels like punishment, it is actually preparation, a sacred disorder meant to disorient the ego so the deeper self can rise, the life you have carefully arranged. The persona you've polished and presented to the world must fracture because it was never the full story. The truth of who you are cannot breathe in that tight space any longer. The difficulty is that chaos doesn't speak in straight lines. It doesn't follow logic. It speaks through symbols, through dreams, through the irrational. It stirs up forgotten wounds and longings. It brings back the voices you tried to silence, and in doing so, it asks, are you ready to stop pretending? Are you ready to become what you are, rather than what you were told to be? The call to chaos is the call to authenticity, but authenticity requires risk. It asks you to lose your footing, to release control, to fall into the unknown, not because it is safe, but because it is necessary. Those who refuse the call pay a quiet price. They stay within the walls of predictability. They avoid the sharp corners of transformation. They suppress their own hunger for something more and call it maturity. But beneath the surface, life stagnates. Relationships become mechanical. Passions fade into memory. The inner world dries up, not from age, but from a refusal to let it burn. When we ignore the call to chaos, We end up living a life that may look complete from the outside, but is hollow at its core. To answer the call is not to embrace disorder blindly. It is to step willingly into the unknown, trusting that something deeper than your current understanding is guiding you. It is to accept the disintegration of old beliefs, old loyalties, old masks, and to let yourself be remade. It is painful, it is terrifying, it may feel like dying, and in a way it is. Something must die. The false self, the borrowed voice, the inherited fear. But death is the prelude to rebirth. The psyche, like the natural world, follows the rhythm of seasons. Nothing grows forever. There must be decay. There must be winter. Only then can the spring of the true self emerge. Those who have walked through chaos do not return the same. They return with fire in their eyes and depth in their voice. They are no longer afraid of darkness because they have made peace with their own. They do not speak in clichés because they have touched something beyond language. They have suffered, yes, but not aimlessly. They have been initiated into the deeper dimensions of being, and in doing so, they carry with them not just wounds, but wisdom. The world often teaches us to fear chaos. It tells us to color inside the lines, to follow the script, to keep everything tidy and controlled. But the soul has no interest in scripts. It longs for realness, even if that realness is messy. It would rather be broken open by truth than kept safe by illusion. That is why the call to chaos keeps returning, sometimes in crisis, sometimes in restlessness, sometimes in a quiet, nagging voice at the back of your mind saying, "This is not who you are." And every time we ignore it, the cost grows. Until one day, life forces the descent, through loss, through betrayal, through collapse. And what we would not choose voluntarily comes uninvited, but absolutely necessary. Chaos is not the end of the road. It is the threshold, the dark forest every mythic hero must enter, the storm that clears the sky, the dragon that guards the treasure. To answer its call is not to embrace madness, but to become sane in a deeper sense, to see that the order you once obeyed was too small for your soul. It is to admit that your life must change, and that the map you were handed is no longer accurate for the terrain you must now cross. And so, if chaos is knocking at your door, open it. Do not fear the unknown. It is where your real life begins. Do not cling to the safety of old versions of yourself. They are too narrow to hold what you are becoming. Step into the storm, let it undo you, let it strip you, let it teach you, for in its wildness you will remember your strength. And in its silence, you will finally hear your own voice again. There is a quiet death that creeps into the lives of those who resist change. Not the death of the body, but the death of vitality, of meaning, of soul. It does not announce itself with tragedy or fire, but with repetition, with days that look the same, with choices made out of habit, not conviction, with smiles that hide boredom. The soul is not fooled by such performances. It senses when life has gone still beneath the surface. It senses when the river of becoming has been dammed by fear, by comfort, by resignation, and it begins to ache, not for more pleasure or more control, but for movement, for transformation, for the unknown. The soul despises stagnation because it was not made to settle, it was made to evolve. There is a seduction in the familiar, a quiet spell that lulls us into staying where it is safe, predictable, unchallenged. We choose routines over risks, shallow connections over vulnerable truths, hollow peace over disruptive growth. And slowly, we drift from our essence. We begin to confuse stillness with serenity, routine with meaning, and comfort with life. But underneath it all, the soul stirs. It cannot breathe in a life that never changes. It cannot thrive in a story that never deepens. It begins to rebel in subtle ways, through restlessness, through depression, through a strange sense of absence even when everything seems fine. That emptiness is not failure, it is a message. It is the soul crying out, "This is not enough." You are not made to repeat yourself. Stagnation does not always look like decline. Sometimes it wears the mask of success, a job well done, a relationship maintained, a schedule upheld. But beneath the surface, the fire has gone out. There is no awe, no risk, no honest questioning, only maintenance, only the careful preservation of a version of oneself that no longer reflects the truth. The soul watches all of this quietly, waiting. waiting for the courage to let the known collapse, waiting for the willingness to risk discomfort for the sake of becoming, waiting for the moment when comfort becomes unbearable and the deeper self demands to be heard. This inner rebellion is not chaos, it is renewal in disguise. The soul is governed by a different law than the ego. It does not ask what is safe, but what is true. It does not want to feel good. It wants to feel fully, even if what it feels is difficult, even if it leads us into uncertainty, contradiction, or grief. The soul grows not through consistency, but through thresholds, through moments when we dare to leave the old shore behind, when we break the cycle and step into the liminal space where identity dissolves and something sacred begins to form. When we deny this process, we suffer. Not the kind of suffering that sharpens, but the kind that erodes, the kind that leaves us brittle, cynical, disconnected. We become spectators of our own lives, going through the motions without presence. And yet, deep within, the soul still waits for a crack in the armor, a spark of desire, a dream that refuses to be ignored. It waits for the moment when the pain of staying the same finally outweighs the fear of change. Those who honor the soul's demand for growth are not spared discomfort. They are often broken open, undone, remade again and again, but in that process, they become alive. They do not settle for narratives handed to them by others. They do not shrink to fit the mold. They follow the voice within, even when it leads into shadow, even when it leads away from approval or applause, because they know to betray the soul is to betray everything. And to follow it, however painful, is to be reborn. Stagnation is not stillness. True stillness is alive, alert, aware. Stagnation is sleep. It is decay that pretends to be peace, and the soul, fierce, untamed, luminous, will never accept a life of sleep. It will whisper, it will ache, it will set fire to what you thought you needed just to wake you up, not out of cruelty but out of love, because it knows that you are meant for depth, for motion, for truth that shakes the bones and breaks the shell. So if you feel numb, uninspired, half awake, listen, do not distract yourself, do not silence that ache. It is not weakness. It is the signal that something inside you still wants to grow, that the soul you carry refuses to rust in place. That life is not finished with you yet. And if you honor that, if you answer that pull toward the unknown, you will discover that the most dangerous place is not where things are uncertain. It is where they have remained too certain for too long. And that to live a true life, you must sometimes abandon the map and let the soul redraw the path with trembling hands and wild, unspoken courage. So I say to you today, beware the comfort that asks nothing of you. Beware the life that grows easy while your soul grows silent. You are not made for sedation. You are made for transformation. Kill comfort before it kills you. Thank you.